Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to do a really spring vibes tulip painting. And I have a tube of paint. I won't use the paint inside of it, but I do have a cap on the paint that I'm going to use to make a circle shape. So I recommend getting something like just a paint cap or any circular, not too big thing that we could use. And we're going to start with a large square brush. This one's about 1 inch and square at the top. And we're going to paint our background, which is going to be very, very simple. We're going to do kind of a blue violet. So I'm going to take a little bit of red into my blue to make it a little bit more purplish, but it still will look blue. And then add white to it. Now I want it to be kind of light at the bottom. And I'm just going to get it on, starting at the bottom. And if I want it a little lighter, just use a little more white mixed in. And if you want a little more purple vibes, mix in a little more red. So it's up to you. But I'm just going side to side with this one. Sweep your brush all the way across. You could always add a little bit of water into your paint if you struggle with blending. So keep that in mind. Blue with a little bit of red. This is if you're using your primaries. If you have like an ultramarine blue, that would give you a similar color. But the red just kind of brings it more into a blue violet. And I'm going up, but I still want to be really light and spring, so I'm using a lot of white mixed in still. Hopefully you're relaxed. Painting should just be relaxing. We're not getting too serious. We're just here to have fun. So therapeutic too. So hopefully you're really tapping into that aspect of painting. That's what I hope to inspire. Not super serious today. But red and blue, red and blue. And then notice I want to take it a little darker as I get to the top, so I'm going to use a little less white. Sometimes I like to just spread out the darker color like this, where I'm kind of taking it, even though it's not filling in all the way, and then take a little white on your brush and smooth it over to blend it in with the colors that come below that are a little lighter. And I'm not trying to make it look perfectly one shade. It could be have a little bit of, some parts might look a little more purplish, some parts might look a little more blue, some parts are a little darker, some a little lighter. But ideally we want it to be a little lighter at the bottom and a little bit darker at the top. So if we need to enhance that, we can always take a little extra white on the bottom and just rub it in. I'm just rubbing it in. It's still wet, but this is going to make it a little lighter down here. And then I could also take a little more of the blue and red with no white at the top and put that in so that it will make the top look a little darker and the bottom look a little lighter. So there's always ways to adjust what you have going on. Again, pull the brush all the way across to get rid of, like if I just lift it up, it leaves like a mark like that. So you want to pull it all the way through, all the way off the canvas so that you're not getting those marks. All the way through. And then that's it. That's what our background is going to be. And we want it to dry before we layer on it. So I suggest, taking a minute to let it dry. I usually just use a blow dryer, so I'm going to do that now. Okay, once you hit it with the blow dryer, it should be nice and dry to the touch. No paint should come off on your hands. And then we're all good to paint on top of that. Now, I'm going to paint the flowers first, and then I'll add stems. I like to do that just because it helps me get the flowers where I want them to be a little bit better. I'm going to use a filbert brush, which is one of those like rounded top brushes. I like to use these a lot, especially for flowers or things that are round. If you don't have, you could also use a round brush, just a round regular brush like that. So whatever you want to use. And then I'm going to go ahead and get my color for my flowers, which is going to be red and white to start. And I'm going for a medium pink. So notice how I'm mixing red and white. Not too dark, not too light. It's kind of a medium pink. That's what I'm going for to start. And then I'm going to go, like, find the center of the canvas. I'm going to go a little bit up from the center and start by making a U where I want a tulip. I'm going to do a couple of U's. I'll do one like over here. Then I'll make one a little low. And I'm going to do another one. And then you can put lines in side of those lines. So maybe I'll add a little extra white. And then I'm going to add a line that comes in the middle of those like that. So see how I can make these lines a little thicker? And then I can add a couple little lines coming in the middle to fill it out. And this is just going to start to begin to get us our tulip shapes. It's super loose at first. And you can always make the shapes bigger. So notice how they're all kind of the same size. I want to have a little bit of more variety in the size. So I'm going to make this one a little bigger. Make this one a little bigger. And I can even have one opening a little bit more, like where it pulls out a little wider. So try to change the shapes a little bit. This one open a little wider too. See how you can make it look like it's open wider. And we want those to dry because we're going to layer on it to make it look better. But for now, we just want to leave it clean. Clean our filbert and dry it. So it should be clean and dry. And then we'll add our stems. So stems are going to be blue and yellow with white for our first layer. And they're going to go right to the base and then pull down. And tulip stems aren't that thin, and they're actually kind of like straightish. But see how I can just pull it, kind of pulling towards the center a little bit. And this one's going to kind of go behind this flower a bit. And then we can paint some leaves that are going to be more like this shape, like a surfboard. And I want them to be a little darker, so I'm going to add a little bit more blue. I'm just using the edge of the brush, thicker to thinner, these lines. And create some different sizes and shapes. That's ideal. And then what's fun is that we can have different shades on our tulips. So if you want to do it right while the paint is wet, you can begin to layer another shade of green. So notice how I can layer the darker shade on top of the lighter shade for the stems. So that it now begins to have more than one shade. We'll take that even further with the smaller brush, but for now, just play with it in the background. And we want those to dry a little bit. But while we do that, let's add some fun details in the background. We're going to take the cap of our paint here, and I'm just going to dip it partially in the white paint so that it's filling up just part of the cap. And then I'm going to stamp it in the upper right corner to make the base for my crescent moon. Then you could use a round brush. This one's a little too fluffy. I'm going to get a smaller one. I'm going to use this one. And I'm just going to pull the paint from that out a little bit. And I'm going to just dab it and pull it towards the center of that circle shape. And I want it to be thinner at the tips of the shape and then thicker on the right side. Kind of zoning out right now. You got to zone out as you do this part. It's like kind of delicate. And notice how I got a little extra paint here. That's okay. We're just gonna work it into the design. I always it's always very Bob Ross over here in my mind, where whatever happens, I just kind of play with it. I don't really perceive anything happening as messing it up or it being wrong or any kind of judgment in that way. I find that that really ruins the process. So I just go, oh, I had a little extra on there. What can I do with that? And then that's where you can get creative with what's going on your canvas. Let's see how I can kind of pull it down and give it this crescent moon look. It looks really fun. And then you can add another layer to make it a little brighter. And then you can even just dip the tip and do some little stars. I just gently take the paint on the tip of the brush and then gently poke. Now you want to try to get 3 sizes for your stars and cluster some together. You don't want it to look like full-on polka dots. It's really relaxing to do these little dots. And I'm just doing them towards the top. That's where they would be more visible. You can always come back and layer more on the moon. And you can use this color here that we did for the background to tone it down too. So if you don't really like how it looks, I would just use the background color, which is that blue with a little bit of red and white. And then you can go in and use that color to clean up your shape. Maybe dab in some more texture. And just overall adjust whatever you need to adjust. It's really easy to do that. I'm just dabbling it out. Softening it with that background color. So play with that for a little bit, maybe add some stars, and then we want to let this dry. So you could either do another blow dryer or you can do a break, whatever you want to do at this point. So once this has dried, you don't want the flowers and the stems to be super wet or it'll be hard to work with and layer. We're going to just keep layering. And for the layering part, maybe get like a little shader brush, little angle, or a small round brush. Something, you know, you can go really, really tiny if you want, because I'm working on a pretty small canvas, so that's totally fine. But if you want to do something a little bit bigger, then go for it. It's up to you. But any of those brushes will work for this. We're just going to be layering to make sure that each section that we have has 3 different shades at least on our flowers. And we're going to define where the flowers are going to go. So I'll start with the small brush. I'm going to do red with just a little bit of yellow and maybe a tiny bit of blue to really make it a little more earthy and darker, but at the same time, it's still pretty bright. So it should still be a lot of red, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of blue. So it's just bringing it into a little bit more of an earthy color. And then for example, I can go up here, get a little bit of that at the tip, and say I want this to be a petal that stands out. I'm gonna line the edge of that petal with this darker color. So see how I can, oh, it's almost like an outline. And then I want to outline it on this side too. So we have a little more definition, and I'm just using this really small round brush. At the base, I could pull up little tiny pulls. And then we can go ahead and do that to some of the other, just the edges. Just consider it like an outline almost. And then let's do that to our others. You know, decide where you want the petal. So I'm just kind of outlining the tips. And then you can go to the base and add a little bit of darkness. So you just have to decide what shapes you want to look like petals and then outline them. So notice I have these ones layered in front, and then you can kind of see some petals poking through in the back. And then this dark color is going to go in and add a little bit of definition, and you can sweep some of it up into the base too. The base of the petals, little streaks. So for example, like this one is more open. So I'm going to take that dark color and put it in like that. I have another petal here and here. So you just got to find your shapes, and you can make them too. So if you decide you want more petals, just you go in with that base color and you could reapply. It's so easy to do it once you kind of know where you want things and all of that good stuff. You're pretty much good to go. So we're gonna go ahead and do this one. And when we color them in, this is kind of a universal base color. We can adjust. Some can be a little lighter, some can be a little darker. We can play with the color of the tulips a little bit more, give them more personality. So that's sort of what I want to do for my dark part here. Then you can clean the brush. Maybe switch it to a slightly bigger brush or something that's just, you know, or you could just clean the one you've been using if you like it and keep going with that. But I'm going to go back with my red and a little bit of yellow and a little bit of white. So it should look a little different, maybe even a little darker than your first shade. We don't want to go too light just yet. And then I'm going to go in around the edges of my shadows with that. And just layer in this other shade that's maybe a little bit brighter and not as dark. I'm just going around the edges. So you can paint over some of the shadows a little bit if they got a little too harsh. But essentially you just want to paint around them, next to them. So I always tell people painting is really about getting different shades and then letting them be layered in such a way that represents whatever you're trying to create or replicate in nature or from your imagination or whatever. So as long as you can see those shades represented in your painting, it's going to take on a quality that's more interesting. It's when things look too flat, like if you just have one shade or something, one shade of pink, you can do it, you can make the shape of a flower and it can represent that and it would be something, but it begins to be a lot more interesting when you have more shades. Okay, now we're going to take it lighter. So I'm going to get even more white on my brush, even lighter here. And then that's going to go in sort of towards the middle of the flower. And just painting these vertical lines. And this is where you can also tone down any shadows as well. So, you know, if they got a little too thick or you just don't want it to be as dominant, you can really go in and paint over those colors to make your shadow look more subtle or just make it even thinner. So if it got too thick, I would just be careful not to completely erase. I mean, maybe some can be, and then that's okay, but don't completely erase. And then change it up a little bit. So maybe you want some that has like a little bit less of that orangey vibe. So it's just more of a red and white, no yellow at all. And then that could be what you play with for some of your colors. And everyone's expression is going to be different. They're starting to take pretty good shape. So fun. And then I can always go back. Like maybe I want more pure red or something. And I can reapply to some parts. I'm just doing like little lines. Now I have more pure red back in there. So much fun to go back and forth. And that's really what a lot of painting is about too. You're going to go back and forth between your colors until you get something that looks a little more like what you're trying to achieve with your colors. So don't get discouraged if it doesn't look exactly the way you want it right away. It's pretty much not going to happen for the most part. I mean, sometimes you get lucky and you go, "Oh, that was like a one brush stroke, just a win, you know, and it happens. But more often than not, you have to go a little bit back and forth between your colors and then work it a bit. Now, once you have a good amount of your medium and dark colors, we can go in with a super, like, just another round brush and do some highlighting with like almost pure white or like a really, really light pink. Let's do like a really light pink, mostly white with just a little bit of red. And then we can go in and add some highlights. So just like little streaks of really light color. And some of these can even dance along the edge of the shapes. Looks kind of cool if you do that. You'll see how I can go along the edges of some of my shadows. Oops. See, I just did that. I'm always making mistakes and getting paint all over the place. Don't let it stop you. Again, it's an adventure. Let it take you on an adventure. I just want little streaks on some of these where you're just doing like these little, like, flower petals have like little veins almost. So it's fun to try to represent that with paint, but it can be in a really abstract way. And then don't forget, you can always go back and add more shadows, your shadow color. You want to make sure that you can see a good amount of different shades, at least 3 different ones. Three is my minimum. Any of the colors you want to play, it's gonna be good. And then we're gonna do something similar with our leaves. So I'm just gonna use that small round brush still, but clean it off. And we're gonna create a darker shade of green by using blue and yellow and a little bit of black. Not too much black, just a little black, go really far. And then I'm gonna go ahead and add different shades to my petals. Now my light is coming from here, so I want my shadows to go on the other side of where my light source is, so technically towards the bottom. So I'm gonna add a layer of dark green to the bottom of my petals, or my leaves, I should say. And it's just blue and yellow with a little bit of black. And then your stem is gonna get a shadow too. And then you can even put a little shadow at the base of the stem. Like maybe the actual tulip is casting a shadow on the stem. So see how I can just take a little bit of that dark color underneath. So those already look a little bit better. And then remember, I can always go back. Like, see, I got a little bit of my stem over my flower. I can just take my paint back. But for my lighter color, it would just be blue with extra yellow to make a lighter shade, and maybe even a little bit of white. This is going to be your highlight color. And you're going to do the opposite. So you're going on the other side. Your highlight color can be more subtle. It could be anything that, you know, relatively looks lighter than your first base color shade. So you can always play. We'll even go back to our base color a little bit. You're just finding your lines. And I'm doing it so loose. Let your hand wiggle if that's what your hand does. I have sometimes people come and they've had, you know, they've had a stroke or they've got, you know, just whatever, anxiety or something, and they're very shaky and they get really insecure about that. And I'm like, don't let that make you insecure. My hand's not that steady all the time. You just let that be part of your style. And that's okay. That's beautiful. That's what makes it unique. So don't be insecure about that. And then maybe I'll go back to more of a medium green, blue and yellow, kind of a medium shade like we started with, and then you can soften your shadows and highlights if they need to be softened. Sometimes people like more of a subtle highlight and shadow thing. Some people like it a little more like cartoony or more abstract. So it just really depends on what you want to see, but it's so easy to blend it out with your medium shade. But just don't lose it all the way. So if you do this, you know, don't lose your shadows and highlights all the way. It can be easy to blend them out completely to the point where it's like not doing anything for your painting, and you need to see those extreme darks and the extreme lights. That's what makes it look interesting. And I can even go in and add some more highlights. I'm going to do a little bit more highlights on the leaves with a lot more white and yellow in it. Super light. And then I can, you know, kind of pull in some little more lines, a little more highlights. And I'm doing this kind of fast. That way it has more of a loose outcome, a little less controlled. And I always like getting a little bit of that in my paintings. It's just like a spontaneous, almost an afterthought. Just whoosh, I just whoosh it in and I don't think, just let it flow. That is just where all the fun happens. And you get a little more texture and everything in there. And maybe I want to do just a little more highlighting on my tulips. Maybe you want some bolder brush stroke, some looser brush stroke. So if you struggle with that, being too perfectionist, get a larger brush. Come in with some red and white, maybe. Maybe I come in with like a really light pink. Just add some little bit of bolder brush strokes over to loosen the style up a little bit. So depending on what your painting needs and how you're feeling today, this may be a little too much. but it might actually be what you need to do. So it depends. So see, I just made that one like really light. You know, you can, I like to show you how bold you can be. Nothing is set in stone. Like you don't have to be committed to anything you've done. And sometimes those bold moves are what really make the painting and make it come alive a little bit more. I totally spilt some paint on there. So what I would do if you want to touch anything up, you know, you can always, again, go back to that background color. Blue with a little bit of red and white. You can kind of touch things up, especially in your moon. You can even thin out some of your leaf strokes with the background color. You know, you can really, painting is, you just do what you want. You can add a little bit of texture in the background too if you feel like, you know, touching things up is weird. Just kind of incorporate it into your background. Maybe I want my moon a little brighter. And then you can just do some pure white highlights if you want throughout. Pure white. You can add a little bit of that to your leaves. I just barely touch here. So see, I'm kind of giving highlights and then I'm gonna let it go. You know, I can go on forever as per usual, but I want to keep it pretty simple. We have a fun, simple tulip like nighttime scene going on. Super fun, super easy, good for practice. Again, you can take a bigger brush and loosen things up, add different shades. Like maybe I'm just gonna show you this because I want to play here. You can make one that looks more of a different color, like a peach one. So if I add more yellow to my pink mix, I can turn this flower into more of a yellow one just by adding to it. So see how that changes the vibe of that one. And maybe I want to do it too. We'll do this one too. So, you know, you're not tied to anything. You can make different shades. Use a bigger brush to loosen yourself up. Layer over what you've done if you don't like it, and then kind of start over. So everything has the ability to be changed. What I love about painting. Notice I just painted over those ones, and then I can go in and kind of repaint some of the shadows. And I'm just changing the color of it so that it's more yellowish and less pinkish. So there's always these things you can play with whenever you're making a painting. I always say that if you don't like what your painting has turned out like, it just means it's not done yet. So keep playing with it until you like it, until you're like, okay, yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm happy with that. And you'll know, it's like you get to a point where you start to get a little too critical and it stops being fun. That's when you should stop and just learn from what you've created that day and play around. And then next time, maybe do something different because you learned. Maybe you don't like everything that happened. Maybe you like some stuff, you know, it's okay. It's just a painting. This is where we have the freedom to learn and play and grow and experiment. So I'm just going to let it go, but I wanted to show you how you could change the colors a little bit.